And now for the week's highlights in economics. I'm joined by the ABC's economics correspondent, Stephen Long.
Emma.
Hi, Stephen. Now, all eyes, of course, have been on Greece. They finally look like they've come through the other end with some kind of a deal with their creditors. It looking good.
Indeed, more than 85% of private sector investors in Greek-issued bonds have accepted a write-down that's effectively 74% of the value of their investment, Emma. So that's good news for Greece. They didn't get everybody, and what they're doing now is putting in retrospective clauses to effectively force the rest of the standouts to accept the write-down. So it's not over, because the international peak body that represents those who issue derivatives and swaps is saying this could amount to a credit event. They're having a meeting to decide that. And if that...
What's a credit event? You mean a default?
A default, yes. And if they declare it a default, then that will trigger these insurance contracts against Greek default. So it's not over yet, but it's not necessarily a disaster either.
But the banks and so on that were holding this debt, they didn't really have a choice, did they?
Well, effectively, they didn't really have a choice, and you can hardly call it voluntary, even though it's being termed as a voluntary agreement. No, they didn't really have a choice. So it was actually a default, in effect.
So what happens if this is called for what it is? What are the implications of a default?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily going to be dire, because although the bankers were talking about a trillion euros worth of these insurance contracts, my understanding is it's much more modest. The real problem is that Greece's debt load is still unsustainable and the economy is in a terrible state. We've had the latest figures out, Emma, and they've revised down Greece's growth to a shrinkage of 7.5%, higher than previously estimated. The unemployment rate on the latest figures has gone up to 21% from 14.8% last year, 50% youth unemployment, and the government and the unions are expecting the unemployment rate to hit 25%. All that is pushing the Greek economy further south with an unsustainable debt load and their budget deficits blowing out. So the issue hasn't really gone away despite this deal, which only really amounts to about a quarter of their overall debt.
Stephen, thank you very much.
You're welcome.